Hi, I'm Rob.
And I'm Orson.
And today on Rob and Orson Discuss, we're going to talk about how do you beat Lantern Control.
It's a tough deck to beat, I would say. Although some decks come pre-equipped with stuff, even in their main deck, to deal with it. So
I don't think there's great answers, but there are cards to try and help you with the matchup.
Yeah.
Something like a Chromatic Sphere in Red-Green Tron. It allows you to always get the draw because it's attached to a mana ability. So whenever they're trying either Lantern of Insight or Codex Shred or anything on top of your deck, it's a guaranteed draw. It helps. I still think it's kind of rough. Well, Red-Green Tron, whenever we played it,
the more of the mill pieces are in play, the worse it gets. But it is a really good early answer to try and get around their one or two Codex or Ghoul Callers.
Well, not really, because once again, if they have, you can't respond to this ability. I can respond to something you're doing, but you can't respond to the draw.
Right. Sphere specifically, yes.
Right. Yeah. So we're not talking about stars, but Sphere specifically is actually pretty good. It allows you to draw a crucial piece.
Yeah. A commenter on our one of our early videos actually pointed out to us that it was a good thing that he did too, because Sphere in specific is actually not a normal activated ability. It's a mana ability. It says sacrifice Chromatic Sphere, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and draw a card. So because of the way it's worded, it doesn't count as a normal activated ability or triggered ability. They fixed it with Chromatic Star, where they made the card draw a triggered ability that happens when you lose the star.
Yeah, when it's put into a graveyard.
Right.
Up next we have, I kind of lumped these together, Kozali Pride Mage, which you'll find in Eye Company, Reclamation Sage, which is only really in Elves, and then Kolaghan's Command, which we see in quite a few decks, Grixis Twin, Grixis Control, Jund.
Yeah.
These 3 cards and these style effects of just destroying one target artifact might be okay early game, but by the time I'm saying like 5th, 6th turn, I think they're actually really bad.
Yeah, single target is not great.
Yeah, because we have a very simple, you can either, a Spellskite will take care of it, or he's going to Academy Ruins it back on top, whatever you destroy, whether it's a bridge or a Lantern or any of the mill cards.
Right.
It's
and by
really
late game it gets bad because at that point you shouldn't be ever getting those cards.
Right. Exactly. So they're kind of rough. And also, if you notice here, these all cost 3 or less, which is just perfect for these Inquisitions to take out of your starting hand, or even if you draw it in the 2nd or 3rd turn.
Right.
So the impact of these cards, not so great. But they do at least give you a little bit of game, I guess.
They very seldom impact the game, even post sideboard and bringing in stuff like
just single target.
Right.
Yeah. We saw in the matchup with Zach Elsick, Ancient Grudge. He shuts off the flashback, so it's still just a destroy target artifact.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's pretty rough. This card I'm only bringing up because I think people will think this is a decent answer. It allows you to respond to things. I don't. Desolate Lighthouse, yes, it gives you some options against Lantern Control.
Well, it's one of the last ditch efforts, because if you're at a point where you're trying to draw and discard off of something like a Lighthouse, that means that the lock is in place and you're just trying to get anything into your hand.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, we're talking about the earliest you can activate this is turn 4.
Right.
How many of these pieces is he already going to have out? It does give it gives you more options as you get to, say, I don't know, turn 8, 9. You have that many lands in play, but you've pretty much lost by then. It's a fine card. It at least gives you some interaction.
It's still it's an out when normally you should be completely locked out of the game.
Right, but it's still pretty rough. Once again,
right.
This is what's crazy about Lantern Control. A lot of the cards aren't actually good answers for it because of how the redundancy.
Right.
And the ability to remove cards that could be problems. I mean, this Surgical Extraction, wonderful.
Right. Yeah, you actually see if you watch some of the matchups of Zach or of Ali Antrazi and them playing this at the big events, you actually see that there are situations where the lock is in place, there's multiple mill effects happening, he's maybe even gotten to the point where he's starting to do damage with one of these things, but the opponent still has a couple of outs, so they keep playing just on the odd chance that they run out. The Lantern player runs out of mill effects to keep them off of the one thing they needed to get back in the game.
Yeah, which actually, if you were going to say 1 or 2 outs, you should maybe concede, especially if they have a lot of these. That we can just get to game 2 and 3 and try and get some of your sideboard cards in, which we're going to go over next. A couple more main deck cards. I have 2 left here. Eidolon of the Great Revel.
Yeah, it's really rough.
Wow.
An early Eidolon is bad news.
Yeah, if I was a mono red burn player, I would actually just aggressively mull
Burn
and
in
try
general.
to get 2 of these.
Burn in general is a bad match for Lantern, but not impossible to win. Just really really hard. Because you've got the burn, you've got this guy, you've got Grim Lavamancer.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
there's a lot going on there. But yeah, I think this is probably the best card against them from burn.
Probably.
Yeah, just a single card. The last card we can discuss is Noble Hierarch. Basically because it itself is a 0/1. It gets exalted triggers. It helps you get under the bridge and things.
On the same token, you could talk about other decks with spell skites. You can talk about Affinity having access to Ornithopters and
Ravager counters and things.
Yeah,
and flashing of plating.
Signal Pest.
Which is actually the flashing of plating. A lot of them can't do because they're not playing that additional swamp. But
right.
Orson's list actually plays an additional Glimmer Void and a swamp in place of the either island or mountain, depending on which list people run. And that does help out as well. Now, as far as sideboard cards are concerned, there's actually a lot. We'll just kind of do these in no particular order. We'll kind of throw these, like the Jace Architect and the Keranos are both in the Twin and Grixis control lists.
Keranos is a major issue.
Yeah.
Jace, not so much because you at least have the option of sticking him on a pithy needle, which means he's just a useless permanent sitting there doing nothing.
Right. Even with Keranos, though, he is really good against Lantern control, but one thing that we've noticed is...
Lantern still has an out.
Right, and that out is actually just getting you to a land on top, because they don't actually care if you draw another card.
Which is what they're trying to do anyway.
Right. Yeah, so...
It's not perfect. Keranos is still an issue once he hits the board, but yeah, he's not quite as bad as he could be.
Right, and actually what's really neat is, since they put the land on top, they make you draw an additional card, which odds are is maybe going to be a non-land card. Now you have one less non-land card in your deck to do 3 damage with, and he's that much closer to milling you. Yeah, so Keranos can actually be a negative effect. I love him. He's still great.
Well, interestingly, when the Lantern player tries to set up a land on top for you to draw with Keranos, and you get that extra draw afterwards, that's one more card that they have to try and control off of your top deck. So that's a plus, I'd say.
Okay. We also have Blood Moon effects. Magus of the Moon, Blood Moon. These are actually really strong, as long as your deck itself can support it and you're not hurting yourself because you just turned off your Desolate Lighthouses, you've turned off your Ghost Quarters.
Yeah, they're not quite as strong once the lock is really sealed down, because at that point, all the Lantern player is really trying to do is either get to mill you to death or to get to these things, and he can still use these things.
Right.
With all mountains.
Yeah, the Codex Shredder can bring it back, but it does help against early Academy Runes.
Very much so.
Which, that's 3 mana, whereas opposed to the Codex Shredder's 5 mana.
Depending on the deck that the Blood Moon effect is in, that could be a big deal.
We also have, I kind of want to discuss these, Shatterstorm and Creeping Corrosion. So, I really like these against Lantern, as long as you can get them in your starting hand. The reason I say that is they only have 2 Thoughtseizes.
Yeah.
2 Thoughtseizes to actually remove it from your hand. So if this is in your starting hand, Kozilek can't hit it. It actually allows you to, once they get everything going, you might actually be able to stop them and then, boom, go into a win of some sort.
Yeah, if you can slow play a Shatterstorm so that they play out their hand, they put a bunch of lock pieces in play, but they're nowhere near killing you, and then you just flash that Shatterstorm out onto the table, and they're like, whoa, all my stuff is gone. I have no hand, because obviously they've trying to get down to 0 for the Ensnaring Bridge. And just because
they play out their deck anyway.
That's a major reset. So, yeah, it's really key if you're playing those in your sideboard to sort of slow play that. You don't want to run out all your stuff. You don't want to run into all of their mill effects and stuff. You want to be able to cast that once they've committed to the board and think the lock is in place, because they have no comeback from that.
A sideboard card that doesn't really...
Now, saying that, it could be just too slow.
Yeah, yes and no. I don't think it's too slow. As long as it's in your starting hand and they don't have the Thoughtseize, I think this is great. They're going to play out
starting
their
hand
hand by
exactly.
turn 4.
You have to mulligan into it.
Yeah, it's very important to mulligan into these. These might even become a 2 of in sideboards. I mean, they are good against Affinity. They're obviously great against this. I guess they're not terrible against Tron and things like that, but I feel like there's another eggs. Probably not. No, I don't really know what else.
Eggs, maybe. I don't know. But eggs isn't very popular anymore.
Right, yeah. Just all the applications. But really, if this becomes a thing, this might be the best card because they each cost
more of
4.
a thing is, I think, what Rob is trying to say there.
Well, of course.
It's definitely...
Right now, its metagame share is very low.
It's low, but it's all anyone's talking about.
Sideboard card that doesn't really help, Nature's Claim. You're going to bring them in if they're in your sideboard. But once again, it hits the same problem that the Mulligans and company hit, which is it's just 1 artifact.
Right.
It does have the advantage of hitting an Aether Grid, which forces them to use a Codex Shredder. I don't know. It's not really... Yes, you bring them in.
It again depends on the deck that card is in. Sometimes a Nature's Claim taking out their one and only bridge is all that it takes to win. Like, against Infect, that could have been the difference between losing and winning right there.
Stony Silence.
Stony Silence.
Ah, yes. Shut down just about everything. Let's see. No. No. No, no. No.
Right.
Yeah, that's a very large portion of the deck. They do have several ways to take care of this, though. It's a great early turn 2 drop, but the Inquisitions now become valuable. Obviously still has the Thought Seizes. And once it's out, Abrupt Decay is still in the deck.
Yeah, Abrupt Decay works. Milling it and hitting it with a surgical extraction works.
Remove them all, yeah. I mean, so it's a fine card though. It's great.
It's really, you're trying with cards like that. You're trying to do the same thing that Lantern is doing. You're trying to lock out parts of the deck. Mm-hmm. So.
Kataki. I didn't actually see it, but I heard that Zach Elsick just completely got around to Kataki, and people thought it was going to be devastating.
I can see that because a lot of times you're sitting there with no cards in hand, like 3 or 4 artifacts in play, and 4 or 5 mana.
Right.
So what are you going to do with your mana every turn other than keeping it around with? It's not quite as bad as it is against Affinity because Affinity, their mana base is also artifacts. So.
Yeah. Yeah, so Kataki, if it's in your sideboard for Affinity, I would bring it in, but I don't think it's quite the answer.
It's worth mentioning that that Stony Silence also hits Mox Opals.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah.
I see this in a couple of sideboards, so I figured we could bring it up. It at least does something against your deck. Pithing Needle is in some sideboards. I think it's interesting for maybe, say, shutting down the Ghoul Caller's Bell or the Codex Shredder, depending on which one they have out.
Maybe Academy Ruins, maybe Aether Grid.
Yeah, so it does have a lot of targets here. Once again, it's not an answer, but it helps. We're just trying to find there is no great answer for Lantern Control, and that's what's crazy about it, and that's what makes it so strong. Because they are controlling your draw steps. They have this early game to disrupt what you might have done, or what you might have sideboarded in. So it's about just a combination of cards to try and help you win games against Lantern Control. And I think Pithing Needle is one of those cards that could just slow them down a little bit and maybe help you draw some of the other sideboard cards.
Right.
This one, I thought it was interesting. I saw it in the Infect list of Todd Anderson. Ley Line of Sanctity.
Yeah. Now, that's a card that you don't see very much anymore, but it crops up occasionally in people's sideboards, and it's a really good idea because it hits a lot of things in this deck. It hits every single mill effect.
Well, actually, Ghoul Callers doesn't target.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. But it hits the Codex Shredders. It hits Lantern of Insight if you're trying to last-ditch use it to shuffle. It hits Aether Grid on a person. It hits Spellbomb on a person. It hits all of the discard.
No, actually, these say target player. You can target yourself.
Yeah, but I'm saying it
right
for what matters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ley Line of Sanctity. That is pretty impressive, actually. Once again, they are trying to lock you out. They're trying to mess up your entire game plan, and the only way to really interact with them is to do the same thing. You have to try and disrupt them in some way, and this just shutting down even half of these, and even this really.
Right.
That's a big deal. That can actually get you some draw steps that you would otherwise not have.
Yeah.
So
the Lantern deck is all about incrementally putting themselves in a position of power. And if you can slow down that incremental advance, then you've given yourself that much more of a chance to win. I think every single deck in the format has at least some play against this deck. It's not like this deck is just an auto win against certain masters or anything. But obviously some decks have more answers than others. Some decks have more wiggle room than others. But it takes very specific knowledge of how this deck runs to be able to beat it consistently.
For sure. So now let's get to what deck do we think just has the best game against Elantra Control? I guess we're going to give it to Red Green Tron. I mean, because of all their interactions, drawing cards, cheap effects.
Tron is just naturally packed with things that have outs against Lantern Control. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe a few sideboard adjustments would really push it over the edge. What's interesting, whenever I looked at all these sideboard cards and I looked at the main deck cards and things like that, I had a realization, there could probably be an Abzan list that you could slightly change, and it would probably be really good against this. The only problem is Abzan doesn't have much card draw and things like that, but, I mean, the fact that they're usually playing cards like this anyway, probably one of these in their sideboard, they might actually have a decent game. And some Abzan lists have now been running at least 2 Noble Hierarchs main deck just to try and speed up their game plan anyway.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not perfect, but I'm sure someone could actually tune a pretty good Abzan mid-range deck and have some good game against this. That might be something we could experiment with.
Really, the problem with Abzan is that it's trying to find its way out of the same maze that all of the creature-based decks are, which is taking out Ensnaring Bridge specifically. Without this gone, they have nothing. So, if the Lantern player is able to get enough protection in place for Ensnaring Bridge, it's going to be just as hard for Abzan as it is any other creature-based deck.
Yeah, true, but that's where I'm kind of
But yeah, white-based decks have access to some of the best sideboard cards for the deck.
Stony plus Leyline of Sanctity, allowing you to have better odds of drawing maybe some Creep and Corrosions, or just, other cards in general. They run Abrupt Decay's main deck as well. I mean, that helps take care of the Ensnaring Bridge.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Abzan just in general, I mean, you decide obviously the paths and everything.
And it's nice that, as weird and off the wall as this deck is compared to the rest of the entire format, you can still get away with running sideboard cards that hit other decks in the format.
Exactly.
You don't need specific cards that only are good against Lantern.
Actually, man, now that I'm thinking about this a little bit further, let's take this another step. So we just kind of discussed this is a really strong deck. This is incredible. Red Green Tron might have the best game against it. Obviously, Burn has a great game as well. So, what deck beats those 3 decks? It might actually be Abzan. Abzan has game against Mono Red. It gains life through Siege Rhino. It's playing all those real cheap creatures. It can play Kitchen Finks.
Yeah. Nice little force field in the form of Lingering Souls.
Right. It has a good game against. Yeah, I actually, this is fantastic against Tron. It just shuts down a lot of what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
So there might actually be a format where maybe Abzan's it might make a comeback.
It's true.
All right, well, I hope you guys enjoyed this Rob and Orson discuss, and we will see you next time.
Bye.